When we think about our type one, we kind of have what some might see as the most meticulous, detailed rule follower colleague. And we're partnering that person up with stereotypically one of the warmest, most relationship driven teammates. And so there's going to be some wonderful synergy with that. There's also going to be some potential for friction with that team, with that matchup. So let's reintroduce the types as a refresher. Our type one, as a reminder, is striving to feel perfect. Sometimes they're called the reformer, the perfectionist. They tend to be very principled. They are driven by doing things right, doing things the best way. And typically it's not just the best way. It's kind of like this is the only way. It's because it's the right way. Their inner critic is incredibly loud. We all can struggle with an inner critic. This type tends to have a very harsh, mean inner critic. So always talk about whenever you feel like a type one is critiquing you or being overly harsh, that's something that they very well might need to work on a bit. But just know that that voice, whatever criticism they might be dishing out to you, whew, that I will hear from them. It's 10 times louder inside their own head. So that might help offering a little bit of compassion. They have very high standards, very strong work ethics about what is right and wrong, what is ethical, what is not. They do not like cutting corners of any site and of any type. And this is one of the nuanced differences. If you struggle between am I a one or am I a three? Again, not all the time, every time, but most of the time, threes are going to be a little bit more comfortable cutting corners for the sake of efficiency, for the sake of getting the goal, the job accomplished so that they can move on to the next one. They don't want to turn in, terrible work by any means. But if it's B plus and they kind of get away with that, that's fine. Whereas type one needs to be A plus plus, no cutting corners, review everything, look at it again one more time. And underneath that thinking is this fear that they're just kind of inherently fundamentally flawed. Like I got to work hard to be good enough. um I got to work hard, I got to be right so that I am worthy, so that I am accepted. Our type twos are striving to feel connected. So whereas the type one tends to be very task oriented, our type two tends to be very relationship oriented. I will say, while we tend to predominantly follow the awareness to action Enneagram framework here at Enneagram MBA, there are other Enneagram takes out there that talk about stances. And it's a grouping. And there is a grouping with other Enneagram theory that says the one and the two and the six are in a group called the dutiful stance or sometimes the compliance stance. But really, it's just they are they have a natural tendency most of the time to put others the what's best for the group. Um, and they'll do it maybe for different reasons, but it's not so much what's best for me. Sometimes, like the three or the seven or the eight might sometimes struggle with. But it's very much that they care about the group. And so this may not be best for me, but it's best for the group. So let's do it there. So the ones and twos have that in common. It's just how that gets expressed might look a little bit different, depending on the type and then also depending on the instinctual bias. So our type twos are driven by the desire to be needed. Um, they feel like I'm valuable if I'm needed. So they're going to put themselves in positions to be relied upon, to be um, indispensable. Um, they tend to be warm, really tuned in to people's feelings. I guess empathetic is the word. They tend to be very relationship oriented. So these are the people that might lead a conversation with, "Hi, how are you? How was your weekend?" And truly want to know, "How are you?" Truly want to know, "How was your weekend?" And need a little bit of rapport building before jumping into it. Whereas the one might just think, "Hey, we got an agenda. Let's just, jump into whatever we need to do." Twos are gonna a lot of times sacrifice their own needs to help others. And that kind of goes to that, well, if I'm needed, then that actually benefits me. So there's a fine line between being kind of helpful and then kind of doing it, kind of giving with hooks, because if I do this, maybe you'll do something for me. Underneath all of this, though, is this fear that I'm only valuable, I'm only worthy, I'm only lovable potentially, when I'm useful. And so I'm gonna say yes, 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 even when I don't have the time, I don't have the bandwidth, but I don't want to sever any sort of disconnection. I don't want to, or any connection and be disconnected. I don't want to say no and potentially sever a connection. Um, I don't want people to feel like they can't count on me. That's very important to our type twos. So we, we sometimes, you could kind of think about this. We have our type one, who is the person on the team that's going to hold the standard. And then you have the type two, who tends to be someone who's going to hold the team together. And this can be a really wonderful, successful, collaborative relationship. And we're going to talk about those things right now. So, when these two get together, the strengths that they bring is that they both care very deeply. Ones care about doing things right. Twos care about people being okay. And when you pair that together, you can build a workplace is that has both excellence baked in and going about that excellence in a very human, people first way. And so they do a great job working together in that way. They can also have some complementary blind spots. We all have our blind spots. We're gonna be talking about everybody's at some point. We have talked about everybody's in the past, but ones can sometimes miss the kind of the emotional temperature of a room. What's the energy? How are people feeling? What are people doing? Um, and twos rarely miss those type of things. They are very tapped into how are people doing and how can I help? Whereas on the flip side, twos can sometimes lose sight of the standard, the goal, because they get so maybe pulled into the context. What's going on at home with somebody? Why are they missing these deadlines? Why aren't they turning in work that is as good as it needs to be? And they're going to have a little bit more, they have probably a lot more tolerance for quote unquote bad behavior, because they can see the best in anybody. Everybody has potential to be incredible and successful, and twos just want to keep giving those chances. But a one is going to be a little bit better at holding the standard, um, not letting other people's issues completely derail their own goals, derail the project, what needs to get done, right? So we need to have both, and these two can blend so beautifully and pull in both. Um, what's the sports analogy? Like kicking the ball down the field, while also taking care of the team that is doing the kicking the ball down the field. Um, There tends to be kind of a natural role balance, and that ones will push for the quality, and the two is going to look for how can we kind of smooth this path so that achieving this quality um, is a good experience for the people that are responsible for getting those goals, hitting those quality marks. Um, are both of these types can be really good in client facing work, team projects. They can work really well together, or anything that requires um, both precision, hard work, rigor, and that relational understanding, seeing people, warmth, being approachable. They can make such a great team dynamic with that. And then ones are really good at keeping things on track. Like I just said, kind of keeping that keeping the momentum going with the ball getting kicked down the field. And then twos make sure that people feel seen along the way, feel valued, feel heard, are being taken care of. And they can learn from one another. And so that's another reason why typing can sometimes be hard. This isn't super common, but I do see it often enough where it is, it can be I guess a common struggle. It's not the most common, but it can be a common struggle between am I a two or am I a one? Because you can have a one who's had a lot of self-awareness, maybe who's done a lot of work, maybe gone to therapy, had some professional development, who really has warmed up, who really has dialed up their empathy, seeing people, bringing in context. And then you also have a two that potentially could be incredible with keeping people on track, keeping the ball moving down the field, taking care of people, and also hitting the marks, hitting the goals, being successful. And so I think sometimes in those situations where is it am I a two or one, but that you just happen to maybe done some development. And so you're seeing some characteristics and tendencies of the other. But as always, the thing that makes a one-on-one is that striving to feel perfect tends to be the strategy that is driving the bus most often. And for the two, it is the striving to feel connected that is driving the bus most of the time. And you tend to do it without even thinking about it. So that could also be a clue. It's like, well, I do make sure that I ask how people are doing as a type one. So am I a two or am I a one? And I think the strategies typically are unconscious. And so it's like, no, I have to use a little bit more energy. I have to bring a little bit more awareness. This is something I've really had to learn how to do. That might give you some clues on, just growth as a human being versus what is your core Enneagram strategy. So they can make such a great pairing for all of these reasons and more. And this is where I would really love to hear from listeners as we go through these, as what else have you seen in the real world that makes this type such a wonderful pairing. The other side of this is where might there be some friction along the way. And one of the places is this need for correction versus need for connection, or just kind of prioritizing right versus the relationship. So ones have a tendency to give feedback to improve. They're going to be more comfortable sharing what isn't right, what needs to be redone. And twos might receive that feedback very personally. And it might not feel like it's just about the project. It is about who I am as a person is being criticized. So that can be hard. Um, a one, a one might struggle with the two in that feedback area because twos have a tendency to do the sandwich method. You know, we again, it goes back to that. I don't want to hurt this connection. So I want to be very careful about how I say this. So let's start with that compliment and then, just real quick bring up what the problem is, and then of course, end on a compliment. And for the one, that can feel frustrating, it can feel unclear. It's like, what do you really want me to do? What are you expecting of me? And so there could be some friction around giving each other feedback. Um, Twos have a tendency, there could also be some friction around pacing and moving things forward, because twos want to take time to check in before we make a big decision, before we do decide to jump into action. What does everybody think? Nines tend to be really good at this too. What's everybody think we should do? Let's hear from the team. How you doing? What's your workload? How you feeling? Are you sick? What's going on? Let's check in first before we do anything. And a one is like, this is the right thing to do. We don't need to ask anybody questions. Let's just do the right thing. It's clear, right? Black and white. And again, not all the time, every time a one is going to behave this or a two is going to behave this way, but just stereotypically speaking, this is what you can expect. For a one, that checking in, I think even the, how's everybody doing? How you doing? That small talk for a one can feel like inefficiency, lost time. And then for a two, though, if you skip it, it can feel really cold. It can feel really hard to have the rest of the conversation or go through the rest of the meeting, because that rapport, therefore that trust, was not built. So there can be some friction around that. Both types have a tendency to shove down feelings. Um, Ones, especially around anger, can have a difficult time, even to themselves, admitting that they're angry, because it can feel wrong to get mad. For a two, it can feel like, I don't want to act mad. I want to be pleasant. I want to be, approachable. I want everybody to like me. I want people to come to me, but I am tired. Can't everybody see that I am overworked, that I've said yes 10 times this week, that I've stayed late, that I worked on my vacation, for you, to help you, and you're not seeing it. I'm not hearing you appreciate it. So both can struggle with stuffing feelings, therefore having some big resentment build up. Um, Both can be a little passive aggressive. Um, and when you don't address that, when it kind of goes unresolved, unspoken, um, somebody's going to blow up. Somebody's going to have had it up to here. Twos will laugh. They say, "Yep, I got that highway to a type A anger when I've had enough." So as accommodating, as group oriented, as these two can be, there could be a time that there is some sort of explosion, or maybe imploding within, that's going to happen if they're not able to get that off their chest, fix those issues, have some of those sometimes uncomfortable conversations. Um, and then there could also be some friction around whose standard we actually go with. So ones have that very strong internal compass, whereas a two's going to be a little bit more, probably a lot more actually, adapt, or willing to adapt, for the sake of, people pleasing. The rule says this, but you're right. Like there's some context here. And sometimes it's the right call. Sometimes the rule that was written, the policy that was written didn't take into account this other sort of human element, that the two is gonna see and really feel. And so this can cause some friction in even, what is the standard? When do we follow the rule to a T, and when might there be some leeway? And there could be some friction around, well, this is what our bereavement policy says. And a two might say, well, there's some additional, you know, things to think about that this person is going through that needs to be considered. It's not so black and white. So there can be some pushback there. And I don't think it's not all of this friction is necessarily bad. I think you could also kind of push each other in a way to that could be kind of expansive, even to consider a different way of doing something, which I know for the ones especially isn't always something you want to think about, maybe. Um, but it can be helpful in your own development and then your relationship dynamics. Um, there can also be some communication style friction, some breakdowns. Um, that goes both how we send the message and then how we might receive the message as one of these types. So, kind of the default communication mode for a type one tends to be pretty direct, um, precise, um, and most of the time, there's going to be some sort of, how can we make this better? Oh, I saw a mistake. How can we make this better? Or, you know what? This is good, but how can it be even, how could it be better? How could it be great? We talk about the type one. If type one had a book that kind of encompassed their energy, it would be the good to great book. And a type two, their default communication mode is going to be very relational, very encouraging, very approachable, probably a lot of times very warm, very welcoming. And so both have a place, and it's just dialing it in with the right person in front of you, dialing it in with each other, whatever needs to be dialed up or down potentially, so that you're not talking past each other. Now, when a type one gets really stressed, their communication style is going to be even more critical, even more rigid. Their tones might be even more sharp. Where a two is experiencing a lot of stress, their communication style might get even more indirect because they're even more worried about losing that connection. Very much people pleasing, maybe saying yes when they truly don't have the bandwidth, and then allowing all of that to make them really resentful. Um, Sometimes what our ones need to hear, or what they're looking for in feedback, or when they are maybe criticized, it's just the question is, am I good enough? Am I perfect? And so sometimes hearing things like, I trust your judgment. Um, this specific thing you did really well on. This specific thing was perfect. So, still being direct, but letting the type one know, hey, I trust you. I trust your judgment on this can mean the world to a type one. I trust your judgment, and I'm wondering if we should revisit this. Or maybe it truly is, you know what? I don't know that I agree with this, but I trust your judgment. Where a type two, a lot of times, one of the key messages that will mean a lot to them is when somebody says, you really matter. You're important to this team. You're an indispensable resource for this organization. You matter. Uh, and it's not just about what you do. You matter because of who you are. The other maybe intangible things that you bring to this team. So yes, like we need to perform, right? We need to hit our goals. We need to do what our role says we need to do. And there's a lot of other things that you're bringing to the table. You matter. I think would mean a lot to a type two. And this is where I'm bringing notes from Enneagram theory, some things I've heard in different in the various workshops that we've done over the years. But ultimately, I am always so interested, and it's always so helpful for myself too when people can share how these things show up for them and their workplace relationships. So if you happen to be a one or a two, and there's another kind of core message that really resonates with you, please share that, and I will pass those things along. Again, enneagramMBA.com/contact. You can write your message in the message box there. Um, and then sometimes when it comes to communication, our type ones may see that softness, that empathy, as either weakness or being incompetent, when of course that's not the case, but that might be how they receive that. And then a direct response, a more direct communication style towards the type two can come across as not caring. Like you don't care about me because you didn't ask about my day. You don't care about me because you just started this email jumping into what you need. No, hello, or emojis, or uh, any sort of rapport building. And so part of that is on each of those types, and in each of us to kind of remember who is talking to us, and then kind of remember our preferences and do the very best that we can. And it's not easy not to take it personal or make it something that it wasn't. And on the other side is the person doing the communicating, remembering who it is you're talking to, what they need, not necessarily your communication preferences. So it might feel cold as a type two just to jump into a conversation with the type one, but they're probably really going to appreciate that. And as a type one, it might feel like a waste of time. You're behind schedule. Why do we have to do this? To ask how was somebody's vacation, your type two teammate's vacation, but that's going to mean so much. And you'll probably end up being more efficient, more productive, because they're going to feel like you care about them, and that's going to give them momentum to get what they need to get done, rather than sometimes spiraling, thinking, what did I do? Are they mad at me? Um, so just remembering about one another, that the one is typically not being cold on purpose. They're just being efficient. They want to get it done. They want to do it right. They want to work hard, whatever that means to them. And so sometimes there's not a lot of room for fun and celebration. That can kind of feel reckless, which is a huge growth opportunity for our type ones, especially our type one leaders. But growth is a topic for a different day. Um, so just remembering that as a type two. And then as a type one, remembering that your type two mate isn't being inefficient. They're just being thorough in a different way than how you might be seeing what thoroughness is. So learning to remember the intention over sometimes how it's being delivered can really help improve this relationship, specifically around communication. And again, it is not easy. It is absolutely not easy. But it will practice, and it will probably be lifelong practice. But I think some of those friction points, some of that frustration can definitely be minimized with some understanding about the other person. So let's look now. We've kind of talked about peer to peer, but let's look at when you have a leader that is a type one and the reporting teammate is a type two. What are some things to think about? One is that this type one leader, and all type one leaders, have a tendency to set very clear expectations with probably some high standards, And that can be such wonderful and needed structure. The type one is going to be somebody who can herd the cats. They're going to get them in order. They can be very visionary, that good to great. Hey, this is fine, but it could be even better. Um, and the thing about their vision is that they also see all the little steps that need to happen for that vision to take place. And so, somebody who can clearly articulate that, okay, we have some structure, we have a step by step plan, that makes it really easy to follow for the most part. Um, they can come across as critical or hard to please. I'm thinking about a couple of type one leaders, specifically from the end of last year. I don't know if they're listening or not, but they kind of were laughing and calling themselves out at, yeah, this is something I'm working on. We had one, just such a, truly, I think a very efficient, a very successful, and I do think a very caring type one leader, who was kind of joking about some of these themes here that we're talking about, and said that his team said he has the resting, you know what face. And he said, I really have to watch myself because, again, my intention isn't to have that. It just seems like I'm always kind of scowling, critical. And then I do have a tendency to look for what's not working versus what is working. Some of that reputation is earned. You can have a laugh at yourself at times too, with the Enneagram. When you start to kind of see some of this in yourself. Um, when you have a two on your team, they're going to work very hard to earn your approval, especially when you're their manager, when you're leading them. Um, and ones are not willy nilly going around giving out their approval. So it can kind of feel like for the type two that they just, nothing they do will ever be good enough, is ever good enough. They just can't win over their type one leader. So, kind of keeping that in mind as a type one leader, you want to watch out for how to kind of take care of your type two teammate as a type one leader. Paying attention to them potentially burning themselves out from saying yes, trying to please you, trying to be good enough for a one who just, I just want you to do your job. I just want you to give me excellence. I don't necessarily want to have to be the one to validate you. But again, sometimes it's not about what we need. It's what does our team members need? What do the different team members need? Probably very different things, to be able to show up and do their best. Now, when the type two is a leader leading a type one, they have a tendency to make the team feel very, they kind of create this warm, very people first team culture. Um, Now, we've already kind of talked about how they may avoid giving hard feedback, or avoiding conflict altogether to keep the peace. So this is a little bit of some nine energy as well. There's a little bit of that overlap. And I think this is where your instinctual bias would come into play a little bit more. I'm thinking of the navigating type two, might be a little bit more, savvy to, oh, we got to be very careful about what we say. Don't want to rock the boat. We got these, inner personality dynamics playing out. Whereas maybe the transmitting type two might be a little bit more, comfortable being direct. Maybe even the preserving type two might be a little bit more comfortable, being direct. So and having some conflict. Again, this isn't all type twos all the time, but it's just some common tendencies is going to be to avoid that hard feedback. And it makes sense for somebody who's striving to feel connected. The ones on their team might initially quietly and then possibly later loudly, um, kind of balk or gripe, complain about the lack of structure or accountability, that could be incredibly infuriating, demotivating, um, for our type ones. Um, you know, and that is a leadership um, struggle, I guess is the word that our type twos will talk about. Sometimes we'll experience is putting up with bad behavior over and over, giving everybody second, third, fourth, fifth chances. And I think not just ones, but I think anybody after a while, it's like, okay, like, we got to do something different here. This person isn't getting it because that can really bring down the whole team. The lack of structure could also be really frustrating for not just the ones, but other types and being able to accomplish things and for efficiency reasons. So, kind of watch out as a type 2 leader, watch out for your type 1 team member potentially going a little rogue, creating their own standard if your own structure and standards are not in place, when they don't trust the process, if any, that their type 2 leader has put in place. So that could cause some friction on both ends. So just some things to be aware of. I'm sure that there's more. And then we've kind of already talked about peer to peer, but um, just kind of real quickly wrapping these kind of groupings up. Um, one and twos can be genuinely such good teammates, very complimentary of each other if they can respect the strengths that the different strengths, most likely, that they are each bringing to the table. Respect and appreciate, right? The risk with this dynamic, and there's going to be risk with any, is that the one might have a tendency to micromanage for the sake of quality and excellence. And the type two might over apologize for things, people please, just kind of be unclear. The sweet spot though is going to be understanding who own who who owns what. So one thought is, the one can own the what. What is the process? What are we working towards? What is the what? Ones, you can own that. And the two kind of can more own how does that what land? How do we communicate this what, this initiative, this process, this project to the rest of the team, or maybe to our customer base? How do we communicate how it lands? And when that, they can be just such a great pairing. So we've talked about growth in past episodes, so there's definitely lots of information on that, but just real quick hitting on how these types can kind of think about how do I improve my relationship with this other type in front of me. One's, you've probably heard this before, but just letting good enough be good enough, um, when it can be. And there are times when it can be. Not every single situation needs to be A plus 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 plus. Sometimes it's like this is good enough. Another thing that our ones I've heard people say from ones is that they can say thank you. They can share what is right about something before jumping into what's wrong and this is what we need to fix. And ones might see that as inefficient, but you could actually be more efficient though if you do those things, especially with your type 2 teammate. Some growth opportunities for our type 2 is going to be around, have you actually told this type 1 teammate what it is you need before you start building this resentment for them not meeting it? Your standards matter too, and they're going to look very different. And your need could be as simple as, it means a lot to me. It would mean a lot to me if we were starting off our meetings with just a, 1 or 2 minute, hi, how are you? How are things going type of thing. And you would really listen and you would really care. Or maybe it's 10 minutes or, whatever. Whatever it is that you need, share what you need before you start to get resentful, that it's a need that's not being met. And I will say more than type twos just, struggle with that. But we're only talking about the ones and twos today, so we'll just keep it narrowed down to that. Um, so kind of practicing putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And I think with all of these, one of the biggest things that can help is just as simple as assuming positive intent. The type one isn't trying to be mean or cold. The type two isn't trying to waste time or be inefficient. Um, it's this makes sense based on their core strategy. This makes sense based on their preferences, right? Some of these things make sense. So, just even assuming positive intent can go a long way in improving these relationships. And then, I've shared some kind of high level theory, some of my anecdotal experiences, and I will be sharing. But ultimately, the teammate in front of you is a very unique human that's also bringing, childhood, their former managers, that their experience with that, um, culture, race, gender, socioeconomic stuff. They're bringing all of this stuff to the table, to work. And so I've given you some things to think about and consider, but ultimately, the best way to get along with your type one or type two teammate is going to be just to ask. And you could even use this podcast as a prompt. Say, hey, I was listening to this and she said that, type ones prefer this. Is that true for you? Or that this really bothers type twos? Would you say that that's true for you? If not, what would you say? What would you add? And just open up. Oh, use it to open up the conversation to find out the specific workplace, I guess, pet peeves and preferences for the actual unique person in front of you. The Enneagram can give us a starting point, but it will by no means be all encompassing.